The Middle East is now facing a dangerous moment. Silence feels louder than explosions, and waiting feels more frightening than action. Iran has officially changed its stance. It is no longer reacting. It is waiting. Tehran is no longer asking if a response will come. Now the question is when. In diplomatic circles and military meetings, one sentence keeps repeating, Iran is waiting for retaliation. The big question is this just a pause or the calm before a massive regional war? For years, Iran has been patient and strategic. Unlike other countries that act quickly, Iran studies its enemies and responds on its own time. This has confused many and frustrated others. But now, things feel different. Iran is sending clear signals. Military drills are increasing. Air defense systems are being moved. Leaders are speaking carefully, stopping just short of threats. Iran is preparing, not necessarily to attack, but to survive what it believes is coming. This change did not happen suddenly. A chain of events has pushed the region closer to war than it has been in years. Tensions with Israel are at an all-time high. Iran-backed groups are becoming more active. Western intelligence agencies are warning of a high probability of direct conflict. In response, Iran is showing both readiness and restraint. It is trying to look strong, but also cautious. Inside Iran, the mood is tense but controlled. State media shows calm and unity. Officials say Iran does not want war, but they warn that any attack will be met with a decisive and unforgettable response. This wording is not random. It is meant to scare enemies and reassure the people at home. But the reality is more complex. Iran's leaders know a full war would be devastating, not only for the region, but for Iran itself. Sanctions have damaged the economy. People are already frustrated. A long war could weaken Iran and create internal problems. That is why Iran seems focused on shaping the conditions for conflict, not starting it. Israel is the most important factor here. The Iran-Israel rivalry has mostly been fought secretly, through cyber attacks and proxy groups. Direct war was always avoided because both sides feared escalation. But now, the rules of this hidden war might be breaking. Both sides seem more willing to test each other's limits. From Iran's point of view, waiting serves multiple purposes. It gives Iran time to gather intelligence. It allows Iran to strengthen defenses. It creates psychological pressure on its enemies. Waiting forces rivals to reveal their plans, make mistakes, or hesitate. Any of these can be used by Iran. Iran is not alone. Its allies and proxy groups across the region are part of its strategy. From Lebanon to Yemen, Iran-linked groups could open multiple fronts if war breaks out. This complicates any military plan against Iran. A strike on Iran could trigger responses far beyond its borders, turning a limited conflict into a regional disaster. Global reactions are mixed. Some countries are calling for calm and diplomacy. Others are quietly increasing military presence, preparing for the worst. The world economy is also nervous, since a major war in Iran could disrupt energy markets and cause huge instability. What makes this moment especially dangerous is the risk of miscalculation. Many wars start not by choice, but by mistake. A single wrong move, a downed plane, or a misunderstood action can spiral out of control. Iran's decision to wait might reduce this risk, but waiting also increases tension. Every action becomes more dangerous. Inside Iran's military, preparations continue quietly. Defense systems are tested, command structures are reviewed, communication with allies is strengthened. These actions do not prove war is coming, but they show that Iran is taking the threat seriously. The message is clear. If conflict comes, Iran wants to be ready. Yet readiness does not equal inevitability. War remains a choice, not a certainty. Diplomatic channels, though strained, are still open. Backdoor negotiations, indirect messages, and third-party mediators continue to operate behind the scenes. Iran's leadership knows that once a war begins, controlling its outcome becomes nearly impossible. This awareness may ultimately act as a brake on escalation, at least for now. As the world watches Iran wait, one thing is certain. This is not a moment of peace, but a moment of suspended tension. Every day without conflict is both a relief and a warning. The region stands at a crossroads where decisions made in secret rooms could determine the fate of millions. Iran's patience, long a defining feature of its strategy, is now being tested like never before. The question remains unanswered. Is Iran waiting to avoid war, or waiting because war is unavoidable? The answer may emerge not from bold announcements or dramatic speeches, but from the quiet movements and subtle signals unfolding right now across the Middle East. While Iran publicly maintains a posture of calm vigilance, the international community is struggling to interpret what this waiting period truly means. Intelligence agencies across the world are divided. Some analysts believe Iran's restraint is a sign of confidence, a belief that time is on its side. Others warn that this silence is far more dangerous than open threats, because it suggests careful planning rather than emotional reaction. In the Middle East, history has repeatedly shown that when major players stop talking and start watching, escalation often follows. Iran's leadership is acutely aware of how closely it is being monitored. Every military exercise, every official statement, and even every silence is analyzed by foreign governments and media outlets. Tehran has learned to use this attention as a strategic tool. By neither escalating nor backing down, Iran forces its adversaries into a constant state of uncertainty. This uncertainty weakens decision-making, delays action, and increases internal debate among opposing powers about the risks of confrontation. At the center of Iran's calculations is deterrence. Deterrence does not require action. It requires credibility. Iran wants its enemies to believe that any attack would carry unacceptable consequences. This belief is reinforced through carefully staged military readiness and controlled leaks suggesting preparedness for multiple scenarios. The goal is not to provoke war, but to make war appear too costly to initiate. In this sense, Iran's waiting is itself a form of warfare, psychological, strategic, and deeply calculated. However, deterrence is a fragile balance. It depends not only on strength, but on perception. If Iran's adversaries begin to interpret its restraint as weakness rather than patience, the entire strategy collapses. This is why Iran's messaging walks a narrow line. Calm enough to avoid panic, strong enough to avoid temptation. Maintaining this balance becomes harder with each passing day, especially as regional actors push their own agendas. Regional dynamics further complicate the situation. The Middle East is not a chessboard with two players. It is a crowded arena filled with competing interests, alliances, and rivalries. Even if Iran and its primary adversaries wish to avoid war, actions by smaller actors could force their hand. A single misstep by a regional ally, a localized clash, or an unauthorized strike could ignite a chain reaction that no one fully controls. Iran's network of allied groups plays a crucial role in this uncertainty. These groups provide Iran with strategic depth, allowing it to exert influence far beyond its borders without direct confrontation. At the same time, they also represent a risk. Their actions, even if aligned with Iran's broader goals, can trigger responses that escalate tensions unexpectedly. Tehran must therefore manage not only its own behavior, but also the actions of those who act in its name. Inside Iran, public perception is another key factor. The Iranian population has endured years of economic pressure, political strain, and international isolation. While nationalism can rally support during moments of external threat, prolonged uncertainty can also fuel anxiety and frustration. The government ES challenge is to project strength without pushing the country into a conflict that could worsen already difficult living conditions. This balancing act shapes every decision made at the highest levels of power. International diplomacy, though largely invisible to the public, continues behind closed doors. Messages are passed through intermediaries. Warnings are issued indirectly. Assurances are offered in vague, carefully worded terms. These diplomatic efforts aim to prevent miscalculation rather than resolve underlying conflicts. They are not signs of trust, but of fear. Fear of what could happen if communication breaks down completely. One of the most dangerous elements of the current moment is the speed at which events can unfold. Modern warfare no longer allows for long deliberation once conflict begins. Decisions made in minutes can have consequences lasting decades. Iran's waiting strategy may be an attempt to slow this process, to stretch time and create space for restraint. Yet the same delay also increases pressure, making eventual decisions heavier and more consequential. Military readiness on all sides continues to increase. Defensive systems are strengthened. Forces are repositioned. Contingency plans are updated. None of these actions guarantee war, but they make the possibility more real. When preparation becomes routine, the threshold for action can lower. What once seemed unthinkable gradually becomes acceptable, even inevitable. Global powers watching from afar face their own dilemmas. Direct involvement risks entanglement in a complex and unpredictable conflict. Non-involvement risks allowing escalation to spiral out of control. As a result, many governments adopt a cautious approach, publicly calling for restraint while privately preparing for worst-case scenarios. This dual strategy reflects the deep uncertainty surrounding Iran's intentions and the region's future. Energy markets and global trade routes add another layer of tension. Iran occupies a strategically vital position in global energy flows. Any conflict involving Iran could disrupt supply chains, increase prices, and trigger economic instability far beyond the Middle East. This reality gives Iran leverage, but it also increases international pressure to prevent escalation at almost any cost. As days pass without resolution, narratives begin to harden. Each side becomes more convinced of its own interpretation of events. Suspicion replaces analysis. Assumptions replace evidence. This psychological shift is often a precursor to conflict, as leaders begin to act not on verified intelligence, but on fear of what the other side might do. Iran's waiting, intended to reduce risk, may paradoxically contribute to this dangerous mindset. Still, it is important to recognize that waiting is not surrender. It is a choice shaped by experience, calculation, and caution. Iran has survived decades of pressure by avoiding direct confrontations that it cannot control. Its leadership understands that once war begins, Narratives no longer matter, only outcomes do. This awareness may yet prevent the slide into open conflict. The coming period will test not only Iran's patience, but the restraint of every actor involved. War is rarely announced. It emerges from accumulation, of tension, of fear, of unresolved grievances. Iran's decision to wait suggests an understanding of this truth. Whether others share that understanding remains uncertain. As the region remains suspended between peace and war, the world watches for signs, small movements, subtle statements, quiet decisions that could tip the balance. Iran is waiting, but the clock is not standing still. Every moment adds weight to the next decision, bringing the region closer either to de-escalation or to a conflict that no one truly wants. Yet many seem increasingly prepared for. As Iran continues to wait, the most dangerous variable in the entire equation is the possibility of a miscalculation. This is not just a political or military concern, it is a psychological reality. When tensions rise and leaders feel cornered, the risk of mistakes grows exponentially. In a region as complex as the Middle East, where multiple actors operate with different goals and different levels of control, a single error can ignite a conflict that no one planned for. Miscommunication is a common trigger in conflicts. Signals get misinterpreted, intelligence gets misread, and actions that were meant to be defensive are viewed as offensive. In the current situation, Iran's waiting can be misread as weakness, which could encourage bold actions from its opponents. Conversely, Iran's restraint could be misinterpreted as strategic preparation for a major strike, prompting preemptive measures from others. This tension creates a dangerous loop where every action increases the probability of reaction. Iran's leadership is aware of this risk. This is why Tehran has been careful not to overplay its hand publicly. Instead, Iran has focused on strengthening its defensive posture and sending controlled messages. But the controlled messages themselves can be dangerous. The more Iran emphasizes its readiness, the more other nations feel compelled to demonstrate their own strength. This cycle of signaling can quickly escalate into confrontation without any side actually wanting war. Another critical factor is the role of technology in modern warfare. Cyber operations, drones, and missile systems have made conflicts faster and more unpredictable. A cyber attack that disrupts critical infrastructure, a drone strike that mistakenly hits a civilian target, or a missile interception gone wrong can all create the conditions for escalation. Iran, Israel, and the United States all have advanced capabilities, and this increases the stakes. The more advanced the weapons, the less room there is for human error, yet the consequences of error become much more severe. Iran's waiting strategy may also be an attempt to manage internal politics. The Iranian government is not a single voice. It is a coalition of competing institutions and interests. Hardliners often demand strong action to demonstrate power and credibility, while pragmatists argue for restraint to protect the economy and avoid international isolation. Waiting allows Iran's leadership to maintain unity by balancing these competing pressures. It sends a message to hardliners that Iran is strong, while reassuring pragmatists that the country is not rushing into war. Meanwhile, Iran's enemies are not waiting idly. Israel, in particular, has been working to strengthen its strategic position in the region. Israel's intelligence capabilities are among the most advanced in the world, and its military has been preparing for a potential confrontation with Iran for years. Israel's strategy has often relied on the idea of deterrence through strength. But as Iran waits, Israel may feel pressure to act sooner rather than later, especially if it believes that Iran's capabilities are improving, or that Iran's allies are becoming more aggressive. The United States also plays a crucial role in this dynamic. Washington has been trying to balance multiple priorities, supporting allies, avoiding a new war in the Middle East, and managing domestic political pressures. The U.S. must also consider the potential consequences of any direct involvement. A U.S. strike on Iran could quickly escalate into a larger conflict, drawing in multiple countries and destabilizing the region. This is why the U.S. has been cautious in its public statements, while quietly reinforcing its military presence in the region. Iran's network of allies adds another layer of uncertainty. Groups aligned with Iran have been active across the region, and their actions can either escalate or de-escalate tensions. For Iran, controlling these groups is not always easy. Sometimes, local leaders make decisions based on local dynamics, not Tehran's strategy. This creates a situation where Iran may find itself forced to respond to events it did not directly cause, simply because the response is expected by its allies and supporters. Yemen is one of the most important locations in this context. The Houthi movement, which is aligned with Iran, has the capability to disrupt shipping routes in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea. This can have massive global economic consequences, especially for countries that rely on these routes for trade and energy. Any escalation involving the Houthis could quickly expand beyond the Yemen border, drawing in regional powers and international navies. Iran's waiting strategy may include keeping a close eye on these developments, ensuring that the situation does not spiral out of control. Lebanon and Hezbollah also remain a critical factor. Hezbollah is one of the most powerful non-state military forces in the region, and its relationship with Iran is strong. A conflict between Israel and Hezbollah could draw Iran directly into a larger war. This is one of the most dangerous scenarios, because it could quickly expand into a full-scale regional conflict. Iran's waiting may be an attempt to prevent such a scenario by keeping Hezbollah in check and avoiding any triggers that could lead to direct confrontation. The psychological impact of waiting is another important aspect. When a country is in a constant state of alert, the population becomes stressed, and fear can spread quickly. This can influence political decisions and public support for military action. Iran's leadership must manage not only external threats, but also domestic expectations. The public expects strength, but also stability. A prolonged period of waiting can create pressure for a decisive action, which could force Iran's hand. At the same time, the international community is watching for signs of de-escalation. Diplomats, intelligence agencies, and regional leaders are all searching for any indication that war can be avoided. Small gestures, such as back-channel negotiations or temporary ceasefires in proxy conflicts, can signal a willingness to avoid direct confrontation, but these gestures are often fragile and can be easily reversed if the situation changes. One of the most important questions is whether Iran's waiting is a sign of strategic strength or strategic weakness. If Iran is waiting because it believes it can outlast its opponents, then it may be confident in its long-term strategy. But if Iran is waiting because it is unsure of the outcome, then it may be vulnerable to pressure. This uncertainty is what makes the situation so dangerous. When leaders are uncertain, they may make risky decisions to avoid appearing weak. Another key element is the role of international law and global opinion. Iran's leaders understand that a direct attack on another country could result in international condemnation, sanctions, and further isolation. This is one reason why Iran may be cautious about initiating conflict. However, if Iran is attacked, it may feel justified in responding forcefully. The question then becomes whether Iran can respond in a way that satisfies its domestic audience without triggering a wider war. As Iran continues to wait, the world remains on edge. The next step could come from any direction: a sudden attack, a miscalculated response, or a deliberate strike. The uncertainty makes the situation extremely dangerous. Yet, it is also a reminder that diplomacy is still possible. If leaders on all sides choose to avoid escalation, the waiting period could eventually lead to negotiations. But if the waiting period is simply a pause before war, then the consequences could be devastating. The Middle East has a long history of conflicts that began with small events and escalated quickly. Iran's waiting strategy is a high-stakes gamble. It may prevent war by forcing opponents to hesitate, or it may create the conditions for war by increasing pressure and uncertainty. The next few weeks and months will determine whether this moment becomes a turning point toward peace or a tragic step toward war. The waiting game continues, but the world is slowly realizing that the silence is not calm, it is charged. Iran's posture of readiness and restraint has created a tense environment where every move is scrutinized and every statement becomes a potential trigger. The situation is not new to the region, but the stakes have never been higher. With each passing day, the possibility of a direct confrontation between Iran and its adversaries becomes more realistic. Yet, the question remains, is this waiting period a strategy for peace or a countdown to war? One of the most significant developments in recent weeks is the increased international focus on the consequences of a conflict with Iran. The global economy, especially energy markets, is closely tied to the region's stability. Any major conflict could disrupt oil and gas supplies, sending prices soaring and causing widespread economic damage. This reality places pressure on global powers to avoid escalation, but it also gives Iran leverage. Tehran understands that the world cannot afford a large-scale war in the Middle East, and it may use this knowledge to strengthen its position. The role of regional actors cannot be underestimated. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates are watching closely, each with their own strategic interests. Some are allies of the United States, while others maintain complex relationships with Iran. These nations are not simply observers. They have the power to influence outcomes through diplomacy, intelligence sharing, or military action. Their involvement could either help stabilize the situation or further complicate it. Meanwhile, Iran's military and political leadership continues to emphasize that the country does not seek war. This message is repeated through official statements and media channels. Yet, at the same time, Iran continues to prepare. Military exercises continue, defense systems are upgraded, and alliances with regional partners are strengthened. This dual strategy reflects Iran's awareness that it must be ready for conflict, even as it tries to avoid it. A major factor in the region's stability is the ability of leaders to communicate indirectly. In recent history, many conflicts have been avoided because leaders understood the danger of escalation and found ways to communicate without direct dialogue. Iran's waiting strategy may be part of this indirect communication, sending signals to show strength while still leaving room for diplomacy. This delicate balance is difficult to maintain, but it may be the only path to avoiding war. However, the longer the waiting continues, the more difficult it becomes to control the outcome. Pressure builds, expectations rise, and public sentiment shifts. In Iran, the population watches closely, and the government must balance the need for security with the need to maintain stability at home. The economy has already suffered from sanctions, and a war would only worsen the situation. This is why Iran's leadership may prefer waiting over immediate action. But waiting also creates anxiety, and anxiety can lead to risky decisions. The most dangerous scenario is a direct military confrontation that spreads beyond Iran's borders. The region is filled with armed groups, proxy forces, and complex alliances. A conflict in one area can quickly spread to another. For example, a clash between Israel and Hezbollah could draw Iran into a broader war. Similarly, increased activity by Iran-ES allies in Yemen or Iraq could provoke a response that escalates into a regional conflict. Iran's waiting strategy may be intended to prevent this, but it cannot guarantee it. In addition to military risks, there is also the risk of political miscalculation. Leaders in Tehran, Washington, and Jerusalem must make decisions based on incomplete information. They must predict how the other side will react. This is a dangerous game because misjudgment can lead to irreversible consequences. Iran's waiting may be a way to reduce the risk of miscalculation by giving leaders more time to assess the situation. But it also increases the pressure on leaders to act, especially if they believe that their rivals are preparing to strike. Another critical element is the role of international diplomacy. Back-channel negotiations and indirect talks may continue behind the scenes, even if they are not publicly acknowledged. Diplomacy often happens in secret, and the fact that it is not visible does not mean it is not happening. If diplomatic channels remain open, there is still a chance to avoid war. But diplomacy requires trust, and trust is in short supply. Iran and its adversaries have a long history of hostility, and rebuilding trust takes time, something the region may not have. The question of timing is also crucial. Iran's waiting strategy suggests that Tehran believes it has time, but time is unpredictable in the world of international politics. A sudden event could force a decision, and that decision could lead to conflict. The international community must remain vigilant and prepared for any outcome. The next move could come from any direction: a direct strike, a proxy attack, or a miscalculated response. At the same time, the possibility of a peaceful resolution cannot be ignored. History has shown that even the most tense conflicts can be resolved through negotiation when leaders recognize the cost of war. Iran's waiting may be an attempt to create space for negotiation. If the world can find a way to reduce tension, the region could avoid a devastating conflict. This would require compromise, restraint, and the willingness to step back from the brink. As the world watches Iran wait, one thing is clear: the region is at a crossroads. The decisions made in the coming weeks will shape the future of the Middle East. A path toward peace will require leaders to prioritize diplomacy over aggression and stability over pride. A path toward war will result from miscalculation, misunderstanding, and the belief that force is the only solution. The Iranian leadership faces a difficult choice. They can continue to wait and hope that diplomacy succeeds, or they can take action to protect their interests and risk a wider conflict. The same choice exists for Iran's adversaries. The region's future depends on whether leaders can manage their own ambitions and fears and choose restraint over escalation. In the end, the waiting itself is a form of power. Iran's ability to remain calm under pressure is a message to the world. It will not be easily provoked, and it will respond if necessary. But this power is fragile. It depends on accurate judgment, careful planning, and a commitment to avoid unnecessary conflict. If any of these factors fail, the region could be plunged into a war that would have devastating consequences for millions. So the question remains, is war truly inevitable, or can the world still step back from the edge? The answer is not simple. It depends on decisions made behind closed doors, on the willingness of leaders to compromise, and on the ability of the international community to prevent miscalculation. Iran may be waiting for retaliation, but the world is waiting for a sign that peace is still possible. If you found this video informative, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future updates.